Today, about 2.5 days before my term ends as governor, I stand before you to explain my frustrations and deep concerns about both the administration and the penalty of death.
It didn't have to happen. It was just sheer serendipity that it had happened.
People were taking credit for the grassroots effort that started on death row.
I supported it in my entire career.
In January 2003, then Governor of Illinois George Ryan granted clemency to all those on death row in light of stark evidence showing the state had sentenced innocent men to their deaths for decades, a decision that would lead to a national movement.
Out of 25, there were 12 exonerations and 13 executions. It's like flipping a coin. Who's going to live and who's going to die?
You know, the death penalty has been controversial for a long period of time. It's been controversial basically since the founding of our republic.
Because the system's neither bad or good, it's just words on paper.
Well, when I came into office in January of 1999, I was a strong advocate of the death penalty.
But the death penalty wasn't even on the governor's radar until he saw a story about a man come within 48 hours of execution, only to be found innocent.
And I saw where this fellow by the name of Anthony Porter had been released from prison after spending 15 or 18 years on death row, and then they determined that he was innocent. And I turned to my wife and I said, how does that happen in America?
I think it was just a human reaction of George Ryan, as he was fond of saying, I'm just a pharmacist from Kankakee. I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand. This is horrifying to me. This is horrible. I didn't realize how bad it was. It was just a basic human response.
So I looked at that whole situation and said, something's not right here. And that's when I came to the fact that we had to either abolish the death penalty or stop the executions and study the situation to see if the law could be fixed or if it could be made better.
The following year, Ryan put a moratorium on the death penalty in order for a commission to investigate cases like Anthony Porter and the 20 others who would be exonerated. But their findings would be completely ignored.
I couldn't pass any part of 85 recommendations to improve the system because it was an election year, and I don't know if I could have done it in a non-election year, but I know I sure couldn't have in an election year. Politics plays a big role in it. People don't want to look like they're soft on crime, and they vote accordingly. But generally my whole staff said it was the wrong thing to do, but their concern was more political. The system didn't work, and I had an obligation as governor. I was the last check on a system that was supposed to work.
By the time Governor Ryan commuted all the death sentences, we had, I think, 13 people who had been exonerated and released. That number ultimately grew to 20. And that was out of a total of 303 people in this state who had been sentenced to death. We have 20 who were released in the face of substantial claims of actual innocence.
February 24th of '83, Janine Carrico was kidnapped, raped, and murdered.
Rolando Cruz had been sentenced to death for the rape and murder of a girl in 1983.
Rolando had become a suspect when this little girl, Janine Carrico from Naperville, Illinois, had been abducted, raped, and murdered.
Well, I think that's a classic case of abuse.
They could not find who did it. Fitzsimmons, who was then the state attorney, he turned around and tried to find who did it. He was called out to the public. He offered a $10,000 reward.
Whatever evidence there was against them, and there was none really, had existed from the very beginning.
They arrested me on August 1st, 1983. When I got indicted, I was 20 years old, 2 months and 5 days.
And yet they weren't indicted until the eve of an election.
It was stupid. And I hate saying it because it was then, and it, believe it or not, it still is to me. It was comical, you know. I mean, you know, I was a smart-ass street punk, you know. I mean, it's just reality. You can't charge somebody for something they didn't do.
J. Michael Fitzsimmons, was being challenged by a man named Jim Ryan. And literally on the eve of the primary, Fitzsimmons, in a desperate effort to win re-election, indicts Rolando Cruz.
It became real the day I walked in for the first day of trial. And they called me in, and we went to the courtroom, and they said, oh, we have a new piece of evidence we have to hand over against Mr. Cruz.
On a so-called vision statement that the authorities had attributed to Rolando Cruz. He denied making it, in which he had been part of a murder similar to this.
But we have no notes. We have no police reports. We have no taped statements. We have no proof. But he said this 17 and a half months ago.
Well, it turned out that the authorities had fabricated that. The prosecutors in that case just ignored complete logic.
But I knew at that point, you know, as I told my mother when we were waiting for the verdict, I told her, well, I know they're going to convict me.
If Ryan had done the right thing, he could have been a hero, and he would have been a hero of this movement, but he didn't. He did the wrong thing. He decided to proceed with the prosecution of these 3 innocent kids and put 2 of them on death row.
I went to death row down in Menard, Illinois, well, Chester, Illinois, down in Menard Correctional Center. And I started trying to figure out what to do. And I would go to the library, the law library, and I would look at books, but I had no clue what I was looking at. One of my main mentors was Dickie Gaines, and he's a death row inmate. And he says, I'm gonna teach you the law. And we started learning the law, and I mean, where it was points where it was 72 hours straight, even longer, without sleeping, just pounding it, trying to learn.
It would take 12 years of tireless effort, 2 trials, 1 appeal, resignations of state officials, and finally, a 3rd trial, one that would see the criminal informant recant his testimony, and the admission of a police officer who had been lying for 12 years for the truth to finally come out.
When Lieutenant James Montesano was given the evidence in front of his face, he broke down and acknowledged that he lied, intentionally, willingly, and knowingly. And the judge said he'll take in consideration, and he called for recess, for a 20-minute recess, I believe it was. And I went down into the cell block. Then they called me with a PA system, said that I had to go because it was time to go back to court. And then they had the biggest bailiff I've ever seen standing right there with 2-way chains, which they never put on me in the courtroom. He put the safety box over the handcuffs, and he put 50,000 volts of electricity around my waist. And then he showed me the trigger mechanism in his hand and said that if I did anything at all, that he would push it. And at that second, my world just spun away because I didn't know what the hell was going on now. Him and another bailiff told me, you're gonna see something in this courtroom, and it's for your protection. So don't get scared. And they opened it, and they had the bulletproof partition, which they never had. And it was wall-to-wall DuPage County cops in there, which they never had. It was always just the 2 elderly bailiffs. And then the Honorable Ronald Maling came in the courtroom, and he looked, he didn't even sit down. And he said, I don't know what the hell all this is in my courtroom, but you get it out. He goes, you get it out. I was looking up, and I was thinking, God. Next thing I know, because they didn't let me be in there. They didn't let me hear, the judge released me. And they had me in the hallway. And he says, well, are you gonna laugh? You're gonna cry? What are you gonna do? And I just looked at him, and I just, you know, like, You know, I mean, he just got to torture me psychologically with all this garbage they put on me. It was 4,473 days.
Rolando Cruz didn't know it then, but he was a free man for the first time in 12 years.
And I walked out, I don't know what it felt. Feeling so many different things, so fast, so quick. First time I got to hug my mother. With no chains, nobody around, nobody.
He was released in 1995, 4 years before Governor Ryan would take office. But his case attracted national attention, and he would work to shape the governor's policy.
I jumped out there, and I stayed in the media's face. It was a lot of hard work.
On January 11, 2003, Governor Ryan declared clemency for all death sentences in Illinois. In 2011, his successor abolished the death penalty in the state.
We have abolished the death penalty in Illinois.
As for the rest of the country,
We certainly created, I think, an atmosphere for discussion that was never there during my early days in government and public service and in my life, frankly, to at least question the system.
I'm a firm supporter of the death penalty. I believe if you take an innocent life, you forfeit your life.
I feel good that I was able maybe to start the movement to abolish the death penalty in some of the other states.
It occurred to me long ago that what we really need to do is figure out a way to prevent these wrongful convictions from occurring, because we're never going to be able to correct them all after the fact.
In a perfect society, we would never have anybody wrongfully convicted. And we are not a perfect society. So we cannot have the implementation of the death penalty as it stands now.